Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of some books that I read because of social media. Oftentimes, because I do make booktube videos and I enjoy watching booktube, that's where you get a lot of your recommendations, that's where you hear about books. But there's a difference, I think, between I heard about that book, that sounded good, I'm gonna go pick it up, versus something like you hear about a book, you keep seeing people talk about it, you're not really that interested in it, but people keep talking about it, or you keep seeing Instagram posts, or you keep seeing people talking about it on Twitter, and you're like, all right, let's see what all the fuss is about. So the latter is the one that I'm more so going to be talking about. Before I jump into it, one, I am going to be doing a part 2 to this video because there was a lot of books that I think fall into this category, but also I would love to know what books you picked up because of social media and how often was social media on the mark? How often did you pick something up because of social media and then actually greatly enjoyed it? Jumping into my list though, I'm going to start with one that, I wouldn't say it totally missed the mark. It was just, it had a lot against it, and that would be From Blood and Ash. So I'm not opposed to fantasy romance. I picked up a couple of actual romance books this year, and I actually thought they were quite cute, and I generally had a good time with them. Obviously, I love fantasy, so you would think that smushing those two together would be perfection for me, but I strangely end up feeling like in fantasy books where the stakes are incredibly high, that sometimes the romance just, in my mind, I'm like, guys, we have things to do. And so the romance ends up feeling a little ridiculous to me. Not always. There's some great romances in fantasy, and I do love a good romance in fantasy, but when it's a big emphasis in the story, it's romance with a backdrop of fantasy, I rarely end up loving it. And From Blood and Ash also, I say all the time, broken record, that I'm very basic when it comes to my storytelling and writing style. I do appreciate beautiful writing or creative approaches, but I typically find myself gravitating towards something where I can more so focus on, if it's a fantasy book, I can focus on the fantasy elements and not get caught up wondering, wait a second, was that a metaphor? Or is that literally how the magic works in this world? Which makes me sound like I'm lacking some brain cells. I can figure it out. It's just, this one has a very straightforward writing style, And it was fun, but I'll put it this way. I think it was perhaps more fun for people to see my reaction to it than it was for me to actually read it. Like, I had fun talking about it with all of you. The experience of chatting and talking to friends about it, stuff, that was fun. And I like being in the know, but ultimately, I saw it everywhere, and I probably could have been fine not picking up. I do want to say, though, I don't blame BookTube for this one. I blame Bookstagram, specifically all the artists I follow, because there's a lot of artwork for this series, and the artwork always gets me. So I blame all of you really talented artists. I'm actually going to be blaming Bookstagram again, and that would be for the book Lancelot. I actually own this, which probably clues you into the fact that I did enjoy it. The writing in this is stunning, but it's not purple prose. It's not a Laini Taylor type of beautiful. It just is so good at grounding you in this world, which it's a King Arthur retelling following Lancelot, so it's more so historical fiction. But the way it transports you to what it would be like in that time period, it's absolutely brilliant. The writing is brilliant. So many emotional moments. And in general, it's the kind of book that you don't want to read fast. You just want to sit in it and soak it up. And it's beautiful. I can't say enough good things about how it's written. There were actually a couple of wonderful people over on Bookstagram who sing this book's praises all the time, and I picked it up because of them. And I'm so glad I did, because it was great. Petrick, who has his own channel, who's wonderful, who's read basically everything, also has read this and greatly enjoyed it. So, there's Petrick's influence also. But if you are looking for a more historical fiction feeling type of King Arthur retelling, I would go for this one. It's very almost like slice of life, where you're getting moments in Lancelot's life, and it's slow. It's kind of a tearjerker. If you're a crier, there's some very sad moments in this book. And I will say there's one scene that I wasn't a fan of, but I think this one did work. Social media did a good job with this one. Next up is a YA fantasy that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and you're probably glad that social media isn't talking about it as much anymore because it was talked about so much, and that would be A Curse So Dark and Lonely. So this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it's a portal fantasy. So there's a girl from our world who gets taken into this fantasy world. There's this curse placed on this handsome prince, and it's a little different than the traditional Beauty and the Beast retelling because he is currently a handsome prince, and he will be until the end of the season. If he does not have a girl fall in love with him, he will turn into this monster that goes around and just kills a bunch of people. It's actually pretty awful for him. He really, really wants to break this curse because he would like to stop killing people, or almost killing people. So I had heard so many people raving about this book for a number of different reasons. And so actually, I was like, do I need another, Beauty and the Beast retelling? And you know what? I did, because I had a good time with it. I actually thought it was better than I was expecting because I was thinking there's no way it's going to live up to the hype. I am a little critical of the second and third books. I think ultimately the first book was my favorite in the series. I think it could have been a standalone, but I still had a good time with it. I still thought it was fun. It's great to pick up when you need a pick-me-up fun fantasy book. It's great between all the big epics. So I would say social media did a good job with this one. Next up has got to be the ultimate I read this because of social media book, and that would be Illuminae. So you may remember when this was popular, the big selling point was how creative and interesting the storytelling itself was, because it's this interesting blend of files, of camera footage, of messages, emails. It's that sort of a thing. And so you're getting the story that way. There's no traditional, here's just third-person point of view type of thing. And I heard that and I was like, I do not want to read that. I don't think I will like it. We have established already in this video, but also many times in other videos, that I am basic. And so I was like, no, I just know I'm not going to like it. I'm not going to connect to the characters. I'm going to get annoyed. Sometimes you have to move the book around to read stuff, and I'm just going to be like, ugh, it's gimmicky. But everybody said it wasn't. Everybody was like, it's not gimmicky. It's actually amazing. Oh my gosh, I love it. So high stakes, so fast paced. And I did like it more than I thought. And I did consider reading more. I am just true to myself, I guess. I appreciate it, actually. And I was surprised at how well it worked, the way that it was told. But I still didn't really love it. So, I mean, that's basically it. And that one, though, booktube everywhere. I feel like everybody was flipping out about this series. How did it end? How do you feel? For those of you that continued on and read the next couple, did you feel like it had a really satisfying ending? Now I'm wondering if I should go back and keep reading. I don't know if I need to. But anyway, see, I'm already influenced. Stop, don't tell me. Just kidding. I do want to know your thoughts if you did finish the series. Next up is a book that, oh man. So everywhere, everybody was talking about this book. And booktube talked about it all the time. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, this character, they're my book boyfriend. And it's beautiful, and it's a photogenic book too. So then all the beautiful pictures of this book. And I was like, we'll see, maybe. Maybe I'll pick it up. And that would be Strange the Dreamer. So I talked about how Illuminae is the ultimate I read this because of social media book, because it's so not my thing. That's somewhat true for this book also. But this book has the extra layer of I kept reading it because social media told me it was amazing. And I'm glad I listened, because I love this book. It's one of my favorites. But it also has a lot of things that aren't my typical taste. I actually did a video, I think like a year ago or so or more, where I talked about books that I really shouldn't like, but I do, or books I didn't think I was going to like, but ended up loving. And this one, it was kind of almost the inspiration for that video, because it's got the purple prose to the extreme, and it's just so out there, and I don't know, I still love it. I love it so much. It's so beautiful. The themes are incredible. Everybody says that when they talk about it. I say it every time I talk about it. But this one, I mean, you've heard me probably talk about it before. And if you haven't, and you're like, I don't know what Strange the Dreamer is, it follows this young man named Lancelot Strange, who is an orphan, and he just loves books and learning, which, by the way, that's one of my pet peeves, actually, in reading, is when a character loves books, because I'm like, what's the easiest way for us to feel like, oh my gosh, hashtag relatable. But anyway, he has this place that everybody is insisting is a make-believe place, and he believes it is real, and he's read everything he can, and then he has an opportunity to find out if the place is actually real. And then there's some other people in the book that you get introduced to, and they're blue. You don't know what's going on with them. and then the story unfolds. And I will say the beginning is slow, and oh my gosh, I vividly remember living in our previous place, listening to the audiobook. My phone was on the kitchen table. I had my headphones in. I'm like, gosh, can we get with it already? And I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to keep going with this. And then I did keep going. And now I'm one of those same people that's like, oh, Laszlo, I love Laszlo. But to be fair, it's because I feel like of all fictional characters, he's the one that reminds me the most of my husband. But, you know, it's okay if you don't have that same connection. You just love him because he's a great character. Next up, I think, is one that it was 100% booktube, and it was 100% I'm new to booktube, what's everybody talking about? I'm getting back into reading kind of a thing. And just the premise alone sells this book, but then hearing people talk about it time and time again, I was like, oh, that does sound cool. And that would be Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. The setting is that there is a man who has the ability to go between parallel Londons, but each of these Londons is different from one another, and the only thing similar from one world to the next are these Londons, and then the worlds themselves are different past London. And I was like, that sounds so cool. That sounds incredible. Oh my gosh, what a unique premise. And all the old school, you know, the booktube people that have been around for a while, everybody was talking about it. And I was like, wow, that sounds so amazing. And, you know, I got caught up in the hype. And V.E. Schwab is now one of my favorite authors, so it worked out. I know a lot of other people, I think this series ended up being overhyped for them, or maybe a lot of people do say that this one leans a little younger for their taste, and so that's part of why they don't love it as much, the series. But if you've tried Shades of Magic and it wasn't for you, I still say give Vicious and Vengeful a go because they're very different from one another. Last for today, for part 1, we have burial rites. So I have said quite a few times before that besides fantasy, I would say I really enjoy historical fiction. I just never know where to start with historical fiction. And I feel like so many historical fiction books are World War II stories, which is fine, but it's a lot of that. And then after that, it's kind of a mix. And I like usually before that time period, probably because it resembles fantasy more so. But either way, I just never know what to pick up. And I remember, there's actually only one person, so I'm going to give her all the credit. Reagan from Peru's Project, who's lovely. I remember her talking about this book, and I was like, wow, that sounds really sad. And also, I was obsessed with Iceland. So this story is about it's based on a true story. It's really tragic. It's about the last woman to be executed in Iceland. I ended up going to Iceland and then reading this book while I was there. And I don't know if it was the mix of being there and driving through the area that was being described in the book, or if it was just because this book is incredible. But I will always kind of cherish this book because it's just one of those stories. I hate to say stories because it's based on something real and tragic, but it's one of those books that I think when people talk about readers, how reading books can help you gain empathy, I think that this is the kind of book that is very true for, because this poor woman's life was so difficult. It wasn't just that it didn't end great. It was her whole life was so tragic and so difficult. And it also shows the ways in which society's views can alter how people see you, and how sometimes you just don't have a chance. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are, how hard you work. Just society's always going to view you a certain way because of whatever the views are of that time period or that place. And anyway, it's an incredible book. It's very sad, so if you do want to pick it up, you know, get ready. But it's almost not the kind of book that you're going to be weeping over, because it is kind of so bleak, and it's just a bummer of a book, but it's great, you know. Am I selling it? Probably not. It is a very wonderful book. I absolutely love it, and I read it because of Reagan specifically. So thank you, Reagan. I will be back with a part 2, chatting a little bit more about some books that I read because of social media. Like I said at the beginning, I would love to know some books that you read. Were any of the ones on my list also books that you picked up because of social media? But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you all later. Bye.